This podcast is for SEO professionals, and each week, with the help of our wonderful guests, we discuss the important stuff that actually affects our careers and progression, but sadly often doesn't get talked about. You know, the invaluable soft and interpersonal skills that are often taken for granted, such as the skills we need for listening, time management, communication, and more. We also talk about the big issues that affect us and our careers, such as burnout, imposter syndrome, self-belief, saying no, plus other big issues and obstacles. With this podcast, we want to share knowledge on topics that unlock our listeners' true potential and enhance not only their careers, but all parts of their lives. So, are you ready to prioritize your own personal growth and career development? Then let's crack on with this week's episode.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the SEO Mindset, where your hosts are myself, Tasmin Suleiman, and my dearest friend, Sarah McDowell. We have episodes going out every Thursday, and this Thursday I spoke to Paddy Moogan and chatted about a situation that many leaders are facing at the moment, a team member resigning. Paddy is the founder of The New Leader, offering agency advisory services to founders and senior management teams, helping them navigate the world of agency life. But before this, he was the CEO and co-founder of Aira for 10 years. So he brought a wealth of knowledge on this topic and shared so many practical tips, right from what to do in that first meeting up to the last day of the team member. He also shared insights on what to do to keep teams happy and reduce the risk of the team member resigning in the first place. Now, before we get into the topic and chat to Paddy, if you are enjoying the content that Sarah and I are creating, if you're enjoying the podcast and would like to support what we are doing, there are various ways you can do this. The first way is you could give us a donation via the Buy Me a Coffee link. You could write us a review. That would be fantastic. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can leave us a review. And the third way is to sign up to the newsletter. There'll be a link for that in the show notes too. But now let's listen to what Paddy has to say on the topic of how to respond as a leader when your team member resigns. Hello, Paddy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tasmin. Thanks for having me.
I've been trying to get Paddy to come and talk to us for a while now, since I heard you speak at Brighton, because so much of what you say is so relevant. And today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is really relevant right now because it's New Year, new goals, and there will be people out there who have decided that where they are staying isn't the place they want to be and resigning. So the topic of the podcast today is when a team member resigns, how do you respond as a leader? And Paddy, your journey has transitioned from running an agency to helping leaders of agencies face challenges and, navigate that leadership journey. I would imagine a lot of these leaders in agencies are facing this challenge right now, that people in their teams will have decided that it's time to move on and to resign. So, tell me a little bit about what that looks like from a leadership point.
Yeah, definitely. So it's one of those things that comes about because obviously around Christmas time, New Year, we all start to think about the year ahead, and our careers, our jobs are a big part of that, right? So I think that it's quite natural for people to come back to work and think, is this for me? They start questioning the role, the job, the career choices they've made, and maybe start to look elsewhere. So I think really the first thing for a leader to really think about is just to be aware of that and aware of the fact that firstly, that's normal, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they've done anything wrong as a leader, but that's something that is just very, very common. If you speak to anyone that runs a job board or a job website, they will tell you that every January there's a massive spike in traffic. So it's not that you've done anything wrong, but just be aware that this could be happening in your team. And I think that it should prompt you to firstly try and get ahead of that trend and try to think, how can I retain my team, keep them engaged, keep them happy, keep them focused on their careers, and give them what they need in their current role. But then when January, February does come around, and if you are a little bit worried about them, and if you're worried about them looking elsewhere, or you think they might be a bit kind of unsure about their future at the company, having a conversation with them and not necessarily going to them saying, hey, are you looking to leave? Like, I'm not suggesting that, but going to them and just asking about how they're feeling in terms of the year ahead. Are they feeling excited? Do they feel like they want to get to a certain point by the summer or by the end of the year? And just having that conversation, really. So I think first it's about that awareness and knowing that this could be going through someone's head, and then just owning the conversation and trying to actually figure out, okay, what else can I do to keep them engaged and keep them happy in their job? Or you may find out, yes, they are a bit disengaged and they have been looking at their options, and therefore you can have that conversation with them.
Because I guess leaders themselves will have gone through that process of evaluating their careers. What do they want for 2025? So from where I'm sitting, I'm just thinking, well, that shouldn't be a surprise that other people are doing the same. Is it a surprise for some of them, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I've worked with enough leaders and enough managers where they've had someone come in the first week in January with their resignation, and the resignation's been a surprise, but they were also surprised by the fact it's coming in January. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course, January resignations is what happens. So some are surprised, and they may have had what you just described themselves. They may have also in the past considered their own options, but I don't think you assume that others are doing it. I think you may not actually make that leap from, well, this is pretty normal, I've done it myself, to realising that your team may do it to you at some point. I think that's a bit different. But once you've experienced it once or twice as a manager, then you realise it becomes normal. So it is something that's a bit more of a shock to kind of newer leaders or newer managers, or ones that maybe don't empathise as much as the average manager with job hunting and things like that.
So you've talked a lot about being proactive and keeping your teams happy and understanding where they are and what they want from their careers. And a good leader manager would be doing that anyway, whether it's July, whether it's December, whether, at any point in the year. They're almost like their career path and aspirations shouldn't come as a surprise to the manager. And the more conversations that you can have around that area, the better. But imagine that, somebody has done all of that good stuff, and we can go into more tips and actions later on, because I think it's really nice to have that proactiveness in you. But supposing it is whenever it was, 3rd of January, whatever the first day back was, 4th, and someone has come in and said, I would like to resign. How do you handle that as a leader? How do you handle it in a way that is calm and constructive?
Yeah, I mean, no matter what, it's probably going to, even if you are an experienced manager and you know that January is a bit of a strange time for this kind of thing, it still might come as a shock. So I think the main thing is to just try and keep that composure and stay calm, and don't kind of let yourself respond too quickly or maybe get emotional about it. And I think one of the ways to actually try and do that is just to really try and listen and try not to interrupt them, try not to jump in. I think remembering that they may have been dreading this conversation. A lot of people don't like the idea of going to their manager and quitting and resigning. I remember one of the first that I had years ago, the person in question started to get a bit teary before they'd even said what they wanted to say, because it was a big thing for them. So I think understanding that this is probably hard for the individual as well, and listening and letting them speak is the first step. But then also not putting yourself under any pressure to immediately respond and kind of react and try and keep them or accept they're leaving or do anything immediately. So I think just listening, but also taking a chance just to be curious and ask questions. You don't want to kind of ask them 100 questions and kind of make them feel kind of awful, but it's a good chance for you to learn about, okay, what are the reasons why they're leaving, asking about their new role, what do they think their new role is going to give them they're not currently getting, and just taking the chance really to get as much information as possible. And being genuinely curious would be kind of where I'd go with that, in that first conversation, and then being prepared to say to them, okay, cool, let me process this. I'll come back to you later today or tomorrow, relatively quickly, and we'll have a conversation about next steps, and just giving yourself that space to step away, think about it, maybe speak to your own boss, if you need to, and figuring out what's next. But I think ultimately just listen, ask questions, try to be curious without pushing them, and kind of feel like they're kind of being grilled on their new job, and kind of giving yourself that space to step away and then come back when you may have a bit more time to think about things and plan your response a little bit
I
better.
love that. So curiosity is something that I'm hearing more and more people talk about, because it takes away the need to fix. You're just finding out, you're exploring. And I really like the idea that you had, that don't feel that you have to have all of the answers in that meeting. Buy yourself with some time and say, look, I'm gathering all of the information right now, and then I'm going to tell this individual, we will talk about next steps today, tomorrow, whenever. But it gives you a chance to step away from the situation. So in both of those, it's a very soft. Both of those are really soft skills. There's no technical way of
Yeah.
handling this. It is about being able to relate to that person, listening, empathy. Is it worth in that situation, because you're the manager, they're your direct report, but almost taking the roles away, being one individual sitting with another individual and having their best interests at heart, and going through that curiosity piece with that hat on rather than your leadership hat on?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you have that leadership hat on and kind of like the team manager hat on, your first thoughts may go towards, or firstly, your ego will probably be a bit bruised because they're leaving to maybe a better opportunity, and that implies that you've done something wrong or you're not as good. That might not be true, but that's where our minds can go. But also your mind may wander towards, oh, what am I going to do with the gap this person leaves behind? And you may start worrying, well, do I need to hire someone? Do I need to replace them? Is a client going to leave as a result of this? You can start to panic a little bit. So I think kind of pushing that to one side for at least a few minutes and just speaking to them as a person and trying to understand, okay, what is it that's happened here? Have I done something wrong? Has the company done something wrong? Or is it just their time? Is it their time to move on and it's perfectly okay? You only really get that if you can try and push aside those panicked feelings of what am I going to do, what am I going to do? And, I'm sat here saying all of this. I've made all of these mistakes. I've sat there and panicked and worried about, oh, I'm going to lose this client because this person's leaving. I've got no one else senior to replace this person. I've sat there and panicked in my head and done my best not to project it onto the person, because it's not their fault. It's not their job to worry about those things. So trying to push that aside and just talk to them and trying to understand what they're experiencing, what they're going through, is definitely a good place to start. And it also helps you figure out, is this the right move for them? Is it their time? Is it a good idea for them to go? Because sometimes it is. Or is it something where actually you may want to try and convince them that this may not be the right move for them? And I've definitely sat there and had that feeling as well. But you don't really get that if you're stuck in your own head thinking about what this means for you, not for them.
And interestingly, we recorded an episode last season called "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" And that's very much more from the perspective of the person who's handing in their notice. So I will put a link into the show notes to that episode, because it gives you two sides of the same story. So, all right, so you're sitting there. Someone said, you've just had a lovely Christmas, New Year break. You've gone in, you're thinking, oh, it's going to be an easy day. All I'm going to have to do is check my emails and gently get into the day. And then one of your team members asks for a meeting. I mean, that's always a little thing, oh, what's this going to be about? The unknown.
Yeah.
And then they land that news on you. And you've taken that manager hat off, you've listened to what they've said, you've maybe given them advice, but then it's about, I guess, putting that manager hat back on again. And what if you want to retain them? What if you don't want them to go? What do you do?
Yeah, it's tough, especially trying to figure that out in that moment, which is probably why you shouldn't go there, right? In terms of immediately saying, "Oh, please stay," or would you consider staying? I would try and again give yourself that space to step away and at least think about that before going back to them and trying to open that door. But it is hard to make that kind of a call. I will say that I think this is true, that probably in the vast majority of cases, if someone has come to you and said they're going to leave, and they're not just leaving for nothing, they've actually got a job lined up, they've gone quite far on this process, I think in the vast majority of cases, they probably should go. I think fighting it in the vast majority of cases is probably the wrong thing to do. So I wouldn't do it just for the sake of it or just as an instinctive reaction. I would take time to actually think about, is this the right call? And one of the ways you can do that is to really try and separate yourself from the situation and think, like, as I mentioned earlier, is it their time? Is it actually the right time to go? Have they been with you for a little while? Have they kind of hit a bit of a plateau in terms of where they can go within your company? Are they getting to a point where you can't kind of not control them, but you can't kind of fulfill their ambitions anymore as a company for whatever reason? Like, and trying to be really honest with yourself about that. And again, going back, I've made this mistake where I've definitely kept people in the past who probably shouldn't have been kept and should have probably gone at the time they wanted to go originally, and I've kept them for maybe 12 months longer than they should have been. So it is quite difficult, but I would try and think, okay, is it the right time to go? But also going back to that first conversation, trying to figure out the decision itself and why they've made it. Are the decisions ones which you can overcome, that you can, are the reasons for that decision ones that you can overcome? So for example, if someone comes to you and says that they're leaving because they want to start their own business or they want to go freelance to give themselves more freedom and to travel, well, most companies you can't really fix those things, right? You can't just say, well, yeah, don't worry about working for yourself, just come back and do this job again. Like, once they want to work for themselves, they're probably going to do it at some point. So you need to try and think about the reasons why they're leaving, and if you can genuinely fix those reasons, and if you should fix those reasons. So for example, if the reason is something that they got upset one day 3 weeks ago by someone in a meeting and that really bothered them and now they're leaving, and that's it, there's nothing else to it, then maybe that is something which you can go back and say, okay, hold on, so this is a bit of an escalation. So you may want to have that conversation, try and fix it. But yeah, it comes down to, is it the right time for them to go, honestly and genuinely? And whatever reasons they've given for leaving, are they ones that you feel like you should actually try to remedy? Or are they valid ones that actually they're going to be true in 6 months' time, not just now? And if they are going to be true in 6 months' time, you should probably bite the bullet and just let them go now, unless there's a really good reason not to.
So supposing somebody hasn't got another job lined up and they're leaving anyway, that would ring alarm bells, would it not?
That's the worst. Yeah, it's when that happens, it definitely implies that, wow, we've made a mistake here, or something deeper might be wrong. And it's one of those things where I think sometimes people do it just because they want a break. So again, it comes down to the reason that they don't want to jump from. They know they want to leave, but they don't want to jump from one job to the next. They do want a break, and maybe they've got the financial means where they don't have to jump from one job to the next, so they're taking advantage and are able to take a bit of a career break for a few months. But if that's not the case, then yeah, it may indicate that something deeper is wrong here, and they just need to get out of the situation, get out of the job, get out of the company. Maybe again something's happened, maybe they're feeling stressed or they've got anxiety about something. Those kinds of things may have gotten to the point where they feel like, I just need out, I need to leave. And again, there's only trying to understand that is really important. You can't necessarily fix those things if you're not qualified, if you're not that kind of person, not a therapist, those kind of people. You might be able to fix those issues, but understanding that those might be reasons for someone leaving and not having something to go to is really, really important. And it's difficult to know whether that means you should try and keep someone. But I think if someone is experiencing really negative thoughts or feelings as a result of their job, again, it's almost certainly the right thing for them to go, even if they don't have another job to go to immediately. But it's, again, trying to understand what those reasons are and if they can be fixed or not.
Just a recap on what you said, it's a lot of those soft skills, listening, removing the ego, empathy, trying to understand, putting their best interests at heart, and understanding what their set of circumstances are, giving yourself some time to figure out, actually, maybe they are looking for a progression in a certain direction and are unaware of something that the organization already has, and gathering all of your responses and taking those back to them if that's the right thing to do. But it is that understanding is key before you can take the right step.
Exactly, and that's why, kind of when you have that conversation, the very first conversation, listening and asking questions and just being really present with them is so important, because without that piece, you're just not going to understand. And oftentimes when you're a manager, say if, one of your team comes to you and resigns, you probably need to go and speak to your own manager, or me even running an agency, I'll go and speak to my co-founder, or go and speak to one of my colleagues at the board level. You probably do need to go and speak to someone. And if you can't accurately relay the information and relay the reasons, you can't even try to fix anything or understand if you should try and keep someone or not. So that's why listening is so important. And again, trying not to kind of be in the meeting with them, but secretly you're kind of thinking, okay, how am I going to replace them? What am I going to do? And panicking a little bit. So that's again why that is so important. And again, it's not. I don't want to make it sound like it's all about the individual, because as a manager, you do have kind of a job and an obligation to balance the individual against the company and the team. So you do need to think about that as well. But in the first instance, I think it is really about, as you said, understanding and trying to get as much information as you can to make the right decision for you as a company, but also for them as an individual.
You've given us a lot to think about there, and each area then presents its more questions. So I'm struggling really a lot to keep this contained, but let's take a break right now. It's been a really good reflection on all of the points that you've made, but when we return, we're going to be talking about that. All right, how do you then handle the next step and them actually leaving?
Cool, sounds good.
Introducing Clear Narrative Media, a purpose-led media marketing agency that transforms how founders, creatives, and organizations share their stories online. Dedicated to assisting you with all your marketing, content, and strategy needs. Their services include photography, consultancy, and social media management. Clear Narrative Media is here to transport your visions to life. They are on a mission to help you to create awareness, build visibility, and enhance your business and professional growth overall. For more information, head over to their website at cnmedia.com or follow the link in the show notes. It's your pal Sarah here. Would you like to support the podcast? Do you want to support what me and Tasmin are doing? Well, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. For example, we are set up on Buy Me a Coffee, which means that you can give us a one-off donation. We'd be very much appreciative of that. And if you leave us a message, we can also give you a shout out. We're also on social media, so let's get connected. Reach out, follow us. Ask us questions, send us a message, suggest topics, whatever you want to talk to us about, we are all ears. We are on all the major social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter or X. I'm not sure how you're meant to say that now. But anyway, there is a link in the show notes where you can follow us. But just search the SEO Mindset and we'll come up. The live podcast is back. SEO Mindset and Search with Candour is teaming up again to record a podcast in front of a live audience the night before Brighton SEO. And the topic is all about personal brand. We'll be discussing what this is, why it's important, and sharing strategies and our own experiences. Time for the important details. It's happening Wednesday the 9th of April 2025. From 7 p.m. at Projects The Lanes. It's free to attend and there'll be free pizza, snacks and drinks. Please help us to spread the word. Tell your friends, your work colleagues, anyone and everyone, anyone who you think would really enjoy this event. It was a sellout last time, so Grab your ticket today to secure your spot. To do that, simply head on over to the show notes and you'll find a link. We really look forward to seeing you on the night.
So welcome back, Paddy. I certainly needed that break because the topic is huge. There's no way we can talk about it all in half an hour. But when somebody has resigned and the manager has taken that time, but it's now time for the person to leave, what advice do you have for managers to ensure that leaving is smooth, that individual leaves with a positive impression of the organization and it's as good as it can be?
Yeah, so there's probably two core parts to it that you need to think about. So one is just the logistics of it. So, for example, when someone's decided to leave, like, okay, what's their final day in the office when they're actually physically going to leave? How do you handle as a company their offboarding? Do they have an extra interview? How do you get their equipment back? All of those kind of logistical things that do need to be taken care of, and the person needs to be given clarity on that process, because chances are they haven't left your company before, so they don't know how it works. So you need to give them that clarity. And if you haven't got it yourself, you need to get it from maybe it's your boss or your HR team, your people team, whoever it is. You need to understand what the physical process of them leaving is. So, for example, it's also quite common for people to start to be taken off projects, to maybe start to lose access to certain documents and things like that. So all of those things you need to really understand and communicate to the person and give them that clarity on, okay, well, today's a month away from your leaving date. Between now and then, here's what you can expect to happen over the next 4 weeks or so. So that's one big part of it. The other big part is around the person themselves and trying to not make it more difficult than it needs to be for them as an individual, but also you as a manager and your team as well. So, for example, I've heard some horror stories around people who have said they're leaving, get frozen out by their manager and just they ignore them, don't speak to them, they stop being invited to meetings, they turn the team against them. All sorts of horror stories around the way the person is physically and mentally treated after deciding to leave. So obviously that's not the way you should do things. That's never going to leave a good impression with anyone. So I think where possible, still actually being kind, being pleasant, just accepting the fact, yeah, they're leaving. It happens. I don't need to be horrible to them or anything like that. That side of it is also really, really important. And I think if you do need to do certain things, such as maybe taking them off projects for maybe confidentiality or for sensitive reasons, whatever it may be, communicate that you're doing that for a reason. Don't just take them off and kind of not really explain it. Just try and be open about what's going on here, because otherwise it can lead to that feeling of them being frozen out and kind of treated unfairly or anything like that. So they're the two parts I'd really think about there. But also really being open with communication, I think, would be the final piece. So letting their colleagues know, being able to talk about it openly as quickly as possible, and trying to make sure that it's communicated in the right way as well. So, for example, if someone's leaving, let the rest of the team know, let them know kind of when you've done that, let them know when they can talk about it openly. Those kinds of things are also really important. Otherwise, it just feels a bit awkward and a bit icky to be kind of treading around each other, knowing these things coming, but you've not told the team about it. And again, I've heard some horror stories of like agencies not even telling clients that someone's left. It's like, well, you need to communicate these things happening to be able to deal with them in the right way.
And with the project piece, I guess, as a manager, if there's a piece of project work that's going to begin after that individual has left, tell them and say, look, there's no point you coming to the meeting, or you can if you really want to, but you can also choose to go off and do whatever you need to do, because it's that silence that void that creates is horrible.
Exactly, and that's where they will assume the worst, and that's nothing kind of, that's actually quite natural for us to assume negativity and assume there's a bad reason for it, where a lot of the time there's a genuine reason for it. Like, yes, like you just said, there's no point coming to a meeting if you're going to be leaving the following week or something like that. So just explain that's the case, and be open about it as much as you can, because it's pretty normal and I'd expect it. But if you, like you say, if you don't tell them, they'll think that there's really negative reasons for it, or you're freezing them out, and again they'll panic and probably worry about it too much. And I think the other thing that comes to mind there as well, which I should have mentioned previously, is when I was running my agency, whenever someone left, I'd always have a final conversation with them before they left. So they'd have kind of like a more formal exit interview with one of the team, and we'd ask questions and try and get feedback, and that'd be quite structured and have kind of consistent questions. I would then have just a one-to-one with them and just ask how they're getting on, ask where they're going, ask what they're up to, maybe dive into some of the reasons why they're leaving a little bit more without kind of being too pushy. And I would try and make that a positive conversation. So being the owner of the company, no matter who it was leaving, I'd always speak to them one-to-one before they left. I think me speaking to them and kind of being friendly about it and not making them feel awful about it would help with that final impression being a positive one as well. And also, to way selfishly, the way I try and think of it is if I can have the conversation and make them feel like, oh, actually, this is actually, Paddy's been really nice to me, like, and not making them kind of confirm that leaving is the right thing because of my attitude, that's actually a good thing as well. Because if I'm horrible to them and they're like, well, yeah, of course I'm leaving, I'm doing the right thing. Like, it's, you don't want to kind of reinforce the decision in their heads and make them think they're doing the right thing because of how you're acting as well. So that's the other side of it, which I probably mentioned too.
And, along with curiosity, that seems to be the word at the minute that people are using. Another word that is high on people's radar is personal branding. And personal branding,
Yeah.
in a way, is reputation wrapped up in a marketing term. But this is the reputation of the leader. This is a reputation of the organization. And that individual leaving is going to take that perception off you and carry it in the outside world. It's a piece to really reflect on as a leader and as the organization, that how do we want to show up for this person, and what impression do we want them to leave with?
Yeah, exactly. And we work in what's actually quite a small industry. You know, people, nearly everyone knows each other, or you're only a couple of degrees separated from people at other companies. So word gets around. You know, if you treat people badly when they leave, people are going to find out about that. And I'm not sat here saying that I've always been perfect at all of this. I'm sure that I could always go back and do things differently and do things better. But I think generally you do need to remember that, people do take away an impression of you as a person and you and your company as well. And because we are in such a small industry, you want to leave a positive impression on people and at least try and make it, don't say make it too easy for them. Ultimately, they're leaving, right? You don't want to kind of make things overly kind of friendly to the point where kind of people want to leave, but you do want to be friendly enough so that they don't kind of leave hating the company or thinking they're doing the right thing or hating you as a leader, because you've kind of then undone probably lots of great work in the past as well through the last couple of weeks of it not working out quite well.
And you touched on the industry that we are working in is so small. They may have the opportunity to come back one day. That's not unheard of. So
Yeah, we had several people come back. Yeah.
having that relationship still intact and still strong and still positive is so important, because there may be an opportunity that they're ideal for, 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
Yeah, exactly. And also, again, selfishly, as an agency, you may have someone leave to go and work in house or a brand. I mean, they may take you with them. They may come back in a couple of years and say, hey, I'm looking for an agency or wherever it may be. So again, not burning bridges. You never know where things are going to come back around in the end. And even now, I'm not running my agency anymore, but I've, in the last couple of weeks alone, had probably 3 or 4 conversations with people who used to work for me, and it kind of keeps conversations going. You never know where they're going to lead. So it's always worth keeping that relationship as positive and open as possible, and not, again, letting someone leaving a company kind of ruin what might have been a good relationship otherwise.
So true. And, during the break, you and I were talking about when this scenario arises, it's because the run up to that point perhaps could have been smoother. And you were talking a little bit about it in part one, was what can you do to be proactive with your team to minimize the risk of people leaving? Now, there's always sometimes it's just time to go for whatever reason. But by and large, what tips would you give the leaders out there, the managers out there, on how to keep their teams and individuals happy and in a good place?
Yeah, so I think, again, there's a couple of sides to it. One is a basic level of setting expectations. So to deal with two of the obvious reasons why people leave, salary and promotions, and those two things, if someone's not getting paid enough, if they're not being promoted or being overlooked for promotion, those can be, even if they're right to be overlooked, they can be big reasons why someone leaves. So I think the first thing is to try and set expectations as to how someone can expect to be kind of stepping up throughout their career. What is the next step for them in terms of promotion? Where are they working towards in terms of a pay rise? If you do pay reviews maybe once a year or twice a year, just setting those expectations with them. So on the pay and promotions front, they know kind of what's ahead of them. They may not know exactly what they're going to get and when, but they at least know how it works. I think that side of it is really important to take care of. And then the other side of it, it's more around the stuff that happens kind of in the middle, because obviously, you're not going to get a pay rise every quarter or a promotion every 6 months, right? So in between those kind of big milestones, everyone needs to feel like they're moving towards those milestones, and they need the next step. So that next step could be working on a new kind of project, or if they're quite junior, leading a client meeting for the first time or leading a project for the first time. All of these little things that actually show they're moving in the right direction. I think as a manager, you have to try and give that path and give them the feeling and kind of the plan that makes them know they are consistently moving forward. Because I think as soon as you are not feeling like that, and you're kind of starting to wonder, why am I doing this? Like, what's the point? Where am I going with this? What's the goal here? If you don't know the answer to that, I think that's when you start to just look around and think, well, I'll just see what's out there. I'll go and check this job board and think, what do they offer me this job that this one isn't giving me? So I think that's where you want to go, really, to try and prevent this and trying to retain people as much as possible. They need the big milestones around pay and promotion. Then they need the stuff that kind of happens in the middle as well, which you need to understand as a manager and understand what motivates them beyond pay and beyond promotions as well, and really try and map their career towards those things as well. And like I said, eventually, yeah, they are going to leave at some point. I think most people are going to leave most jobs at some point, and just knowing, because then if you've done all of that work I just spoke about, then someone decides to leave anyway, it kind of helps to know that, well, it is their right time, because I've done all of this stuff with them. They've done some great work, but they still want to go. And knowing there's not much else you can do here as a manager, it kind of makes it easier to understand, yeah, it is their time to go, because I physically can't do anything else for them. The company can't do anything else for them. So it is the right time
And
for them
then
to
again,
go.
you're putting their best interests at heart and knowing that you've done everything that you could do. And one thing that you said just there, understanding their motivation outside progression in terms of title and salary, is hugely important. And one of the drivers that I hear from so many is flexibility in location, flexibility in working patterns. Different people are at different phases in their lives. Somebody, a young parent today will need different things from their role to 10, 15 years' time. So knowing your team and knowing each individual is so important.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to cater for each of those things, because as a company, it's hard to, obviously, policies are policies, but like I said, understanding them, it firstly, you might be able to help and might be able to give someone that flexibility they want, but also you probably start to see where you can't do it. So, for example, if your current policy is, let's say, 3 days a week in the office, and someone keeps talking about how they're struggling with that and they only want to do 1 or 2 days a week in the office, if you know that the company's never going to change that, that's a red flag to think, well, actually, that person may go at some point, and it's not something you can necessarily fix. But you won't know that unless you understand that person as an individual, like you just said. So even at that kind of level, knowing where someone's head's at in terms of what they want from their job and their career, you might not be able to fix it, but it will at least let you know where they're at and where potential risks may lie within your team. Or you might be able to say, well, actually, we can fix that, or we can make a change here to accommodate for that if you really want to. So, yeah, the understanding is really, really important, even if you can't necessarily fix the thing that they're asking for or they'd like
Well, I
to
suppose
have.
it also helps you to prevent breaking things that are currently working. So if the team are working 2 days a week in the office and you know that by and large that's what they value, that's why they stick around, that helps their lives, then if you're going to change that to 3 days a week, not to say you shouldn't, but being aware that this will have an impact is also a different way of looking at that.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you may go ahead anyway, but you can go ahead with that change knowing that what it might mean that we lose this person, or it may mean that this person might become demotivated or unmotivated, demotivated, because of this change that we've made. And you can decide, well, should we go ahead anyway? But again, without knowing any of that, you don't really know how to optimize for people's happiness and engagement and
You know,
careers.
one of the things I used to do when I led a team was when someone joined, I would have those conversations quite soon. What is it that motivates you? And then what is it that you're looking for? Where do you want to build up your skills? So I had an awareness, and then when the strategy came down, when the goals came down, saying, this year this is what we want to do, I then build up what we were going to be doing in that next quarter, half year, whatever it was, and then try and align each individual who wanted a speaking opportunity or whatever it was. And then when I allocated and talked to them about this is what your lot looks like, I didn't use those words. But say I would make a point of saying, I've picked this intentionally because you said on that day that you would like to do more of this. Have I understood that correctly? Whatever, whatever, whatever. Just that piece that they, one, felt heard, two, I did something with it, went so far in that relationship and that loyalty. And it's not always the big stuff, is it? Sometimes it's just the small.
No, not at all. And actually, one of the things you said there was that feeling of feeling heard, because sometimes someone may come to you as a manager and say something they want or want to achieve, and you may not be able to give it to them immediately, but you can hear it and acknowledge that you've heard it and say, look, I'll keep it in mind, or whatever it may be. But they just want to feel like you've understood it and you will actually take it on board. They don't always expect you to fix it instantly, because a lot of people are fair and reasonable. They know that you can't always do that. So feeling heard is really important. But again, something you said there as well is that alignment between the strategy you're being given as a manager and what you're asking your team to do. That is in the best interests of both them as an individual, but also the company as well. Because obviously, if you go too far one way or the other, it's just not going to work. So that alignment between what the company needs and wants versus what the individual can do and contribute towards that is really, 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 really important as well.
Wow, Paddy, we've talked about such a lot today. I mean, I knew it was going to be a big topic, but as we were talking, more and more is being uncovered, and I've actually started scribbling down different ideas for podcasts for the future based on this conversation. Um, what is a key thing that you would like listeners to take away from today?
I think that if you're a manager, most managers don't get any training at all. So I think if you're currently a manager or you want to be a manager, I would really push hard to try and be given support, training, go and seek it out, whether it's free, paid, in person, online, doesn't really matter. But the default position, unfortunately, seems to be that most managers don't get much support at all on how to actually be a manager. So I think the first takeaway would be around just not accepting that, or just not, don't assume it's just going to come at some point, because it probably won't, unfortunately. So I definitely try and think about how you can make that happen and try and instigate that training and support that you definitely need
I
as a manager.
fully hear what you say there. I was so fortunate that the organization that when I started managing teams, they were so brilliant at the training that they gave, the support that they gave, the coaching within the organization, external, and and when we talk about positive PR to this day, I would cite them as the best organization I've ever worked for. So it 100% agree with you. There are quite a few podcasts that we've recorded that I'm going to link in the show notes. So one is on listening, one is on Miracle recorded one about, are you cut out for leadership? Is it one that's something that you want? Keeping teams happy, should I stay or should I go? So, and actually, Miracle, when I asked her this next question that I'm going to ask you, who should we be following? She gave me your name, and she cited your newsletter, saying that's the one newsletter that she never fails to click on the link and to read. So the plug-in for you there. So who do you think we should be following?
Kind of feel bad not saying Miracle now, but yeah. So the one person that comes to mind is actually someone called Lauren Spearman. She's a consultant who's I came across her from my wife actually because she's on TikTok, and she's also just started a podcast called Working on It, and her whole kind of narrative premise is around helping people in their careers. And one of the things she does, which is really interesting, is she'll kind of go and find companies that are hiring and recruiting and look at their job ads and say what's good, what's bad, and talk about the workplace generally and how to handle yourself in the workplace, how to progress in your career. So she's a bit of an all-rounder really when it comes to careers, but I found that she's really, really good at just sharing stories that are quite relatable and quite resonant. So yeah, I definitely recommend following her she's on LinkedIn, TikTok, and yeah, her podcast as well is really good.
Wonderful. That I've never heard of her. I definitely would look her up. So I will put a link to her in the show notes as well. And what's the best career advice you ever received?
Probably my second agency job. My boss at the time, I don't know if he said this to me in these words, but there was definitely a feeling of like pushing me to kind of own my own career progression and to try and actually ask them what I could do, but also go to them with, well, what do I want to do, and trying to make it really clear how I wanted to progress. And I think there's a lot of people who they wait for a company to kind of tell them what they can do, and it is partly on a company to do that. But I think as a person, you should try and take ownership as best you can, and that definitely helped me early in my career. But also, he was quite good at making it clear that me making his job easier would make my career move faster. So being the person he could rely upon, being the person he could trust, and one of the things he said to me once was owning problems, not just solutions. So not being the person that just wants to work on the good stuff, but also wants to work on the not so good stuff as well and fix problems and puts a hand up to try and fix projects that are going wrong, clients that are going wrong, and being someone who can actually step up and fix things, not just kind of work when things are going well.
So three connected bits of career advice there that wraps up into the big old ownership word. So now the brilliant advice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely.
I've really enjoyed this discussion. I've learnt lots,
Yeah, me too.
and it's just like I said, opened up all sorts of ideas about future episodes that we can have on this podcast. So thank you ever so much, Paddy.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me, Tasmin.
And that just leaves me to say, if you're listening to this and enjoying what Sarah and I are putting together, then a few reminders on how you can support us. One of them is to, donate via the Buy Me a Coffee link. Also, wherever you listen to this podcast, if you could leave us a review, that would be fantastic. And we too have a newsletter. It's not as huge as Paddy is, but we are very keen to grow it. So subscribe to the newsletter where we talk about episodes and give a bit more detail around the topics that we've covered. So there is also a link to the newsletter sign up in the show notes. And once again, thank you so much for listening, and just leaves me to say goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.
Don't forget about that live podcast happening the night before Brighton SEO, which is all about personal brand. Yep, the SEO Mindset and Search with Candour podcasts are teaming up again. It's happening Wednesday, the 9th of April, 2025 from 7 p.m. at Projects The Lanes It's free to attend and there'll be free pizza, snacks and drinks. Please help us to spread the word. Tell your friends, work colleagues, anyone and everyone. Help us shout it from the rooftops. It was a sellout last time, so to avoid that horrible FOMO feeling, grab your ticket today to secure your spot. Head on over to the show notes for the link, and we look forward to seeing you on the night. Looking to create awareness, build visibility, and enhance growth for your business, organization, or yourself? Introducing Clear Narrative Media, a purpose-led media and marketing agency that transforms how founders, creatives, and organizations share their stories online. Dedicated to assisting you with all your marketing, content, and strategy needs. You can find them on all social media platforms and online at cnmediaa.com or follow the link in the show notes.